Look into this dark, unforgiving glass eye, the mesh of the microphone. Tell it your deepest thoughts, hopes, fears, and desires. We will take these emotions, turn them, and feed them back to you, for we have goals that your feelings will assist. This is how we rule, from the shadows, playing your emotions like puppet strings. We lead you to destinations that we have prepared, and you willingly oblige, thinking these decisions to be your own. When you do as we wish, we reward you, and when you go against us, we punish you. In a million subtle ways, we influence your supposedly free choice. By this method, we rule over a population convinced that they are the masters of their own destiny. Welcome to the Empire of Lies.
Yes, welcome. Welcome back once again to the Empire of Lies. I am your host. He is the eunuch. To my left here is News Fist, aka Chris. And tonight we will be discussing more in our series in this season about propaganda. And Chris and I both have some things prepared. Now, you might ask yourself, why is the image and why is the framing device for tonight the Tower of Babel from Genesis? Well, we will get to that. But before we get to that, I'd like to remind everyone, unlike my other streams, I won't be pausing during the stream to respond to paid chats, hyper chats, super chats, etc. This is a more educational, information-focused short stream series. We'll be speaking for around an hour, and then we'll be doing. Then we will be looking at your chats and responding to you with whatever you have to say and whatever you have to ask us at the very end. So in the next hour or so, I'll be popping up the reminder. Which it will look like this. You'll see it on the bottom of the screen. When I pop that up later, it means we'll be getting closer to the end, and that'll be the reminder to get your paid chats in if there are things you want to ask us or say to us. In regards to how you can financially support the wonderful work that we do, I would like to remind you, all of the money I bring in on this stream, I split with my buddy Chris over here. And those dollars can come to us in the form of entropy messages, which is what I prefer, as well as short messages on Cash App and PayPal. You can also send in tips if you subscribe monthly on Subscribestar, which I highly recommend you do, because for even $1 a month, your name could be included at the beginning of all my streams in that awesome 3D intro by Lomax Designs. And of course, I am greenlit for hyper chats and rants on Odyssey and Rumble, respectively. Get those in anytime in the next hour, and Chris and I will respond to them at the end of the stream. So with that being said, what we're going to do is I'm going to tell you guys why I have chosen the Tower of Babel. And I'm going to tell you the story of the Tower of Babel, and then wrap up why I chose it as the topic towards the end. So, Chris, let's ensmallen. And this here is the image of the Tower of Babel I chose. It's beautiful artwork, and it speaks to me on multiple levels. It's a great piece. And if you could, pretty please, Chris, go ahead and bring up my slide 1, if that's ready. And I want to read to you the few verses of the Tower of Babel from the book of Genesis, King James Version.
Just give me a second.
Take your time. I already have it here. I'm going to keep reading.
There we go. Right.
This is from Genesis 11, verses 1 through 9. And the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. And it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar. And they dwelt there. And they said one to another, Go to, let us make brick, and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and slime had they for mortar. And they said, Go to, let us build a city and a tower, whose top may reach unto heaven, and let us make a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower, which the children of men built. And the Lord said, Behold, the people is one, and they have all one language, and this they begin to do. And now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do. Go to, let us go down, and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build the city. Therefore, in the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth, and from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth. Now, excuse me. The Tower of Babel is a cautionary tale about trying to build something too vast and too arrogant. Whether or not you believe in Christian mythology, this is a good cautionary tale which applies to what the anti-white oligarchs are trying to build today. They want all races, all ethnicities destroyed. They want every single one of you listening, whether live or on replay, to have no racial identity, no ethnic identity, and no cultural touchstones. They want you to be an individual bereft of any shred of natural, healthy identity, like we've discussed previously on this stream series, so they can control you via an ersatz identity assigned by them. Them, of course, being the oligarchs and their army of bureaucratic managers. I chose the Tower of Babel as the framing device tonight, and as Chris reads his prepared material for tonight, I want you to have this mythological tale fresh in your mind while Chris reads his presentation. So with that, Chris, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Oh, thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to go back to that beautiful picture. I have no idea who it is that made it, but gosh, it's very, very pretty. So, keen-eyed observers will notice that the WEF 2024, Davos 2024, has started. And this is why we are using the framing of the Tower of Babel in terms of large global projects that seek to bring the entirety of the Earth together in one language or one paradigm or one totalitarian system, and how it is doomed to fail. This year, the haughty confidence of 2019 and 2020 has been truly dispelled. A note of pleading has entered the discourse. This may not be visible to the casual observer, but the change in tone is obvious to those who have been closely watching the WEF for years, like autists like myself. It is now understood by many that the aim of the WEF is global communism, although they would never use such language themselves because of optics. Therefore, in this episode, we will try to consider in greater detail some of the mistakes of the elite. What is it in their own nature that makes them overlook certain things, and how could these be exploited as a weakness to push back? So I'm just going to elucidate a few of the points that they are coming up against. And this is not just the WEF. If you look back through the history of communism, there is always this tension. Indeed, the sort of classic communist struggle was between the idea of socialism in one country, which is what the USSR adopted, and world revolutionary socialism, which is what the Chinese went for after the Russians abandoned it. Now, of course, the first thing that they come up against is human nature. This is the most obvious mistake of the communist elite, something that they always overlook, with the unspoken suggestion that those who are not human, that is, those who do not adapt to socialism, will be destroyed. As the old saying goes, if human nature is not compatible with socialism, then it is human nature that must change. This makes socialist systems inherently unstable, even after the resistant part of the population has been killed off, for once such an act is committed, the populace will not soon forget. Any who are born with resistance to the regime will hide. Mothers will hide their children. And the antidote to this problem from the point of view of the elites is social media and social credit, with the idea that there will be no escaping the thought police once everyone's thoughts are laid bare. However, this is also not a foolproof method. If such a regime were instituted, people would simply learn to say what is expected on social media, in school or in work, and keep their private counter-revolutionary thoughts to themselves or share them in private. Now, this tendency is what produced what is known as the grey men of communism, particularly in China. The urge to never let any kind of emotion show upon your face, lest that emotion be seen as untoward or against socialism, produced a group of people who betrayed no emotion at all, the grey men of the party. And social media will adopt this form if it is censored in the same way. We need only look at 2020, 2021 Twitter to see this phenomena. And this breaking of the feedback loop between the elites and the people that they govern, where no one tells them what is really going on, contributes to this acceleration. Even in such an environment of complete censorship, the counter-revolutionary energy does not dissipate. Rather, it builds and builds, seeking release, seeking confirmation that reality is indeed what it appears to be, and not what the regime pretends that it is. This yearning for freedom, especially prominent in the West, has been a bane to Western socialism, which may be the reason for the Great Replacement and inbreeding, a calculated plan to reduce the particularly white European love of freedom through interbreeding. However, this is also fraught with uncertainty. Is the desire for freedom a recessive or dominant trait? Even if stamped on, would it re-emerge in a generation? The need for a technocratic class means there will always be a need for those who can technically create and manipulate technology, which is always a fount from which resistance can spring. Now, my personal view on the global technocratic class is that this is what the trans are meant to be. The trans are being created as a sort of technical commissar class because they will be completely beholden to the state, shorn from their family, reliant on the government for medication and also for the pseudo reality that sustains them. They will be the perfect bureaucratic class to trigger such things as genocide. They will not stop to unleash horrors upon their own people. And I believe this is the real reason why we are seeing the outgrowth of this class. And of course, someone who has successfully transitioned, not just in body, but in the sort of crazy mind way, can be trusted within the regime because they have demonstrated the ability to ignore the most fundamental reality there is, the reality of the body.
And
Next,
if I may step in here
please.
and say something, my experiences with medicine, counseling, work, insurance, hospitals, being someone that is in the transgender bucket when it comes to healthcare, identity, health insurance, health anything, I've had to deal with that since I was a teenager because of my mutation. I was pulled into that. They tried to force me to be part of the pseudo reality. Why do you think they desperately wanted that? Why would you think that? Why would they want someone intelligent, confident, charismatic? Why do you think they tried to indoctrinate me and make me a powerful warrior for their side? Why do you think that? Is it just
Exactly.
because they cared about me?
Oh
No,
yes. Oh, they
no.
care so much.
Because they saw within me, and now, of course, I don't think they consciously thought this, but this is the way the pseudo reality operates. They want everyone of any power and influence to buy into their delusional hellscape and to be a commissar, to be an enforcer. Because, like Chris brought up, what have we seen in the last 20 years? What have we seen? Oh, trans women are women. Oh, if a female wants to be a male and cut her breasts off and shoot herself insane with testosterone, you better treat her like a regular man, or else. The or else part is what really matters, because if they didn't have power to follow through on the or else, none of this would mean anything. It would just be
Yes.
yet another crazy person howling at the moon. But
Yes.
the people that hold the leashes of those crazy people and forge them into being the enforcers and commissars for the pseudo reality. That is why the transgenders have power now. That is how they are used, and that's how they tried to indoctrinate and use me. And I'm very thankful, thank God, thank all of our gods, that I did not fall for that for long and I escaped it in the mid-aughts. I'm very thankful that I didn't go down that rabbit hole and become so invested in the pseudo reality that there was nothing left for me. That would have been a very dark, ugly end for me. And I'm very thankful that I didn't go that far. So I just wanted to add my personal experience there because, yes, the people that I met, counselors, doctors, people that owned property, people that owned hospitals, they were all on board with this transgender craziness. And even though I don't think they consciously thought it, I think it's because they realized that was real power they could wield in the emotional, mental battlefield that we all find ourselves on.
Yeah. 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 That's a really good point. I'm glad you got out of it too.
Me too.
Right. So the second thing that they are going to come up against is the devil. Despite the many years that the communists have spent telling everyone that God does not exist and the devil is simply a fantasy, I disagree with this assessment. It is particularly evident that devilish behavior or sin damages the body and the mind, and the wide promotion of sexual promiscuity, drug use, and disregard for the truth diminishes the human soul and renders it much weaker than it would otherwise be. This also applies to the elite and the managerial elite who must administer such a society. In particular, the negative health effects of the homosexual lifestyle will become glaringly apparent as the managerial elite is increasingly composed of the gay and the trans, and as society turns into a place where meritocracy matters little and who you sleep with to get ahead matters much more. The results of such degeneracy in the ruling class is already readily apparent in the USA and will contribute more and more to the competency crisis that will make it impossible to maintain the kind of technologically complex control grid that the premise of the new society is built upon. And as I was saying before, I believe the purpose of the trans is to be the new dependent technical class. They will have the intelligence to program and maintain the control grid, but also be totally dependent on the regime for hormones. It is always
And
possible.
not just hormones, but to reflect back at them their psychotic choices they've made.
Yes, yes.
Because if
It
you
is-
mutilate yourself and drive yourself insane by going against the divine order or the natural order without anyone to reinforce that, you're just an absolutely hollow, empty, crazy person.
And the state is your only family,
Mhm.
which is also very, very important.
Mhm.
It is always possible that after the instantiation of the revolution, there will be a Stalinist turn, where a leader will come along and get rid of the degeneracy and those who push it in an attempt to keep society going, which would be a net positive eventually. I mean, this is a bit of a black pill, but also a white pill. These kind of systems, if they manage to instantiate them, are inherently unstable and do not last for very long. Look at the USSR as a good example. Even communist China is not really communist anymore, not in the way that it used to be. No one's going around China and, pushing for, the collectivization of farms. They have essentially just become a very, very rigid form of kind of national socialism, I guess, with a sort of
The way
capitalist
that I
edge.
explain what has happened with China in the last 40 years is the Nazbol vortex. Much like what we saw towards the end of the Soviet Union, especially with what Stalin started doing in the middle of the Soviet Union. They realized that if you go full tilt Marxism, like the old school, 1917 to 1920 stuff, all that does is
Bolshevism.
destroy and cripple, and
Yes.
then you have nothing left. There's nothing functional. So the Nazbol vortex is you have to sort of create an ersatz nationalism just to give people a reason to live, just to reinstate some form of functional civilization. And I think that the Chinese do that well, because not only are they now, I don't want any Asians listening to me to think that I'm speaking unkindly towards you, but one of the Chinese strengths and weaknesses is conformity and wanting to be like everyone else and putting others and not being shamed by others ahead of your own needs. And so that's why I think China has succeeded in the Nazbol vortex where the Slavs and the Europeans have not as well, in my opinion. So the China that we have today is sort of like it's a little bit American, it's a little bit National Socialist. It leans into the things that actually function. So you could say, modern day China is really just Han National Socialism, but they still lean sort of more towards the Marxist part sometimes. So that's why we call it the Nazbol vortex, the National Bolshevism.
Thank you. Right. Despite what the Frankfurt School would have you believe, you cannot build and sustain a society purely on rapine, degeneracy, and sodomy. Such a society would be inherently unstable. Not only would very few people have children, but the population would be weak, sickly, and stupid. The effects of childhood transition on IQ are already very well documented, as is the effects on IQ of race mixing. This would contribute further to the competency crisis. As soon as a group with a standard deviation greater of IQ emerges, the ruling class will be helpless, since by this time, not only will all of their tricks be learned by those who have suffered under its bondage, but the stupid will literally be unable to comprehend the strategies of the smart. Now, there are some tactics to mitigate this. If you look at Pol Pot's regime in Cambodia, for example, they just went around and killed all the smart people. If you wore glasses, the chop was for you. And Cambodia has still not recovered. But again, I don't think, honestly, that the globalists are willing to go that far. They seem, although there do seem to be a few aspiring Stalins in their mix, the general impression I get of them is that most of them are extremely soft and flabby and believe that the revolution will come about sort of its own accord. I'm not sure they are really ready to fight for it. I guess we are about to find out by 2030. Number 3, economics. Despite the many years that the socialists have spent bending the rules of economics through the use of usury and control of the university system, the laws of economics are called such because they are laws, iron laws, not propositions. The current vision of the new society is to ask people to become impoverished in order to fulfill a set of shaky utopian propositions such as saving the environment or racial equity, etc. None of these measures, not even central bank digital currencies, will stop the black market. Indeed, it is often the elites themselves that foster the first stirrings of the black market as they continue to seek the luxuries available under the old regime. This black market needs a currency to function. It needs people to produce and sell black market goods. It needs people to import and distribute these goods. And as it becomes apparent that this market exists and that those who trade in it do very well for themselves, more will join, as well as those who simply need necessities not covered by rationing. It is possible that they may take the Leninist route of shutting down all commerce, but even Lenin had to relent as society nearly collapsed, instituting the new economic policy, which allowed a small trading elite to get rich, known as the NEP men. Fascinating period of history, by the way, what sort of happened after the Bolsheviks came into power. You cannot buck the laws of supply and demand, no matter how much you mutilate economic models, something that the USSR discovered to its dismay. Cryptocurrency is a massive gaping hole in the armor of monetary control, with technologies such as Monero likely to play a significant role in the black market. Number 4, propaganda fatigue. Keeping knowledge from the people in a highly digitized world is going to be a big problem for the regime, as is propaganda fatigue. In the early years, you get buy-in from many people, but once it has run its course for a decade or so and the promises have all turned out to be hollow, there is a gradual rejection. Again, the USSR experienced this exact phenomenon. Originally, the experiment, which is what communism was sold as, was seen as a noble and good thing by the Russians. Well, not all of them, but many of them, especially as those who objected were removed. But gradually, the holes became so large that it was only the commissars who really believed. And as always, they were the most stupid and ideological of the people. In an echo of the competency crisis, as self-selection continues, the quality and effectiveness of propaganda degrades further and further until no one believes a word the regime is saying and everything grinds to a halt.
Can I
There are
pause you
signs
there
of this.
and
Sorry,
ask?
go on. Sure.
I'd like to pause you there and ask something. When you said it was only the most brutal and the most devoted and dumb that were the commissars left who truly believed, I would like the viewer, as well as Chris here, I would like the viewer, whether live or listening later on replay, think about the mongrels that we see as being leaders of our militaries, the spokesmen we see as health experts or health administrators in your country. Have you noticed that they all look like sickly, degenerate mongrels? What about in the United States? All of these disgusting transgender freaks being promoted in the US military, being paraded on stage, getting interviews on CNN and Fox News. Old, wrinkly men with bad wigs and makeup. That makes me think of exactly what Chris was talking about with the diehard commissars of the old Soviet Union.
Yeah, exactly. Um, There are signs that propaganda fatigue is already happening in the West with woke, DEI, ESG, etc., etc. Of course, the response from the regime to questions why the new system is not working is always because the system does not have enough power. But this too reaches an endpoint. At a certain juncture, the system has been given all the power. Then they usually switch to blaming their enemies. The communists, of course, were notorious for this, keeping an enemy alive. Goldstein from 1984 being the excellent example of this. But this too eventually begins to ring hollow. For if the system has unlimited power, and yet it is still not able to defeat a small group that is against it, how much power does the regime really have? 5. Foreign actors. There are a number of foreign actors horrified by the Western turn to communism, who can be expected to try and help the population, whether through the infiltration of accurate news or information, cultural products, or even military assistance. The role of the US in undermining the USSR is notable in this regard. By the end, everyone was listening to American music, wearing American jeans, and yearning to visit the West, as the legitimacy of the regime they toiled under was completely undermined. It brings to mind the way many in the West look at Japan now, actually, consuming Japanese cultural products, wanting to go visit. So we are
I
sort
think
of
that's one of
seeing.
the reasons why we've had such a huge uptick in what we call weebs, the people
Yes.
that just absolutely abandon their Anglo culture or French or German culture and they just completely steep themselves in Japanese culture and pop culture and lore because they have this dissonance with their own culture because of all the reasons we talk about.
Well, what's happening to culture now in the West is very similar, not as extreme, but very similar to what was happening under the USSR. You can also
Mhm.
see this in North Korea. All of the local cultural products are steeped in propaganda. There are only 3 or 4 stories that can really be told, and they are just told over and over again. Because to invent something new, to say something new, is to bring the risk of opprobrium, to bring down the wrath of the censors. And even in the USSR, towards the end, where they started to liberalize somewhat because the cultural stagnation had gotten so bad, it still took a long time. Necessary cultural production requires freedom. Too much rigidity always results in merely a retelling of the same stories over and over again. This is why in the USSR, in North Korea, everything is about the revolution. Because you can always talk about the revolution. You can always make a movie about the revolution, a play about the revolution, but you don't want to, say anything about what's happening right now. You might slip up. Excuse me. Where am I? um, It is true that the US spent a fair amount of money and effort on these projects to undermine the USSR, but they found a very receptive audience in the Russians and East Germans due to the widespread discrediting of the regime. Those countries that recently escaped the yoke of communism can be expected to intervene and try and halt the transformation, if for no other reason than self interest. Communist regimes are dangerous, unpredictable, and warlike. Not being able to make anything themselves, they frequently resort to conquest, both for economic and for reasons of legitimacy, because they can't have the bad example, of which I will speak more below. Obviously, the plan by the UN TARDs, the, the UN pushes, is to reinvigorate the Leninist idea of a global revolution. But getting the whole world on board at the same time is a mammoth task that is, in my opinion, too complex to possibly succeed. And any countries that do not fall will provide a counterexample that will be increasingly hard to keep from their populace, like East and West Berlin. Incidentally, there was a whole chapter in communist history about the disagreement between the USSR and the CCP on whether to back global revolution or socialism in one country, as I said before. 6. Technology. The control grid will need a large number of compliant technologists to run and maintain maintain it at exactly the same time as the regime will be destroying the health, IQ, and spirit of those same people. Large technological projects initiated by the government are already bad enough generally, but the implementation of the control grid is likely to be awful and full of holes, not least because there will certainly be built-in backdoors for the elites and intelligence services that will be discovered and exploited. As these systems age, they will degrade. Who will maintain the infrastructure required to keep the grid functioning? The server farms, the code readers, the AI models. As the quality of this infrastructure degrades, more and more holes will appear, allowing more and more freedom for the intelligent and those who maintain or sabotage the grid. The technology will become so complex that those ruling this society will have no idea how it works, and thus, in a sense, the real power will pass to the technicians who will likely not be able to understand or fix the systems designed before their time. As education degrades, even the understanding of the programming languages used to build the grid may decay, making errors impossible to fix, especially when some new exploit is found. Number 7. The problem of the bad example. One of the reasons for the push for worldwide revolution is the problem of the good or bad, depending on your view, example. As long as there is one other country out there not following socialism that is doing really well, it gives lie to the idea that everyone must starve in a totalitarian regime for freedom and justice, or social justice, for example. East versus
Or
West Berlin.
today they would more likely say equality or equity.
Yes. I mean, it changes every couple of years, but we
Yeah.
all know at this point exactly what they're talking about. They can call it, moon we harvested, cereal we harvested from the moon, and everyone's going to be like, oh yeah, that's just social justice in a new wrapping. Every single time they change the wrapping. I mean, imagine you did this to a child, right?
Right.
Instead of buying them a new present for Christmas, you just take the same thing and you wrap it in a new piece of wrapping paper, right? And you give it to them. After the first couple of times, the trick is seen through. They're not. It's not going to work.
They know they're getting the same toy every year, despite what you call it.
Yes, and literally exactly the same toy, scuffed and used. Oh, this old thing again.
Yeah.
People are twigging on, and this is one of the things
It's like,
they.
what? Mom, this is just Marxism again.
Yes. Oh, social justice again. It's good for you, Timmy. Why did you wrap it up in new paper? Why didn't you just give me the box? Oh, it's not social justice. It's equity and inclusion. Yeah, it's the same. It's the same bloody thing, And despite the, or maybe because the elites believe in sort of the infinite malleability of the human mind, they seem to always assume that they can pull this trick off indefinitely, despite the fact that even a 5-year-old child would be able to see through this.
Mm-hmm.
Since doing the entire revolution around the entire world at once is going to be impossible, it is inevitable that other countries will ignore the WEF, Argentina for example, and unlock fabulous freedom and growth for their citizens. The usual way this problem is countered is through information control. But with the modern internet, this is much, much harder. If Trump gets in this year, the entire project will have to be abandoned as the US undergoes massive economic growth because of cheap energy, and everybody else around the world says, hey, why can't we have that? Indeed. Indeed.
And also, I wish our friend Javier Milei a lot of luck as well, assuming he's genuine, and so far he seems pretty genuine.
Of course, the usual suspects will reply, oh, we can't do that because my fascism or my climate change. But having the US curb stomping Europe with economic growth is going to be a very bad look. In conclusion, although the initial implementation of the world revolution may be terrible, such a system cannot possibly last more than a few decades, despite or probably because of the expectations that it will last forever.
Mm-hmm.
So now is the time to learn skills such as programming, cryptocurrency, black market trading, hacking, and etc. Hopefully it will not come to that, but having a suite of skills that will allow you to survive on the outside of the government controlled system, or just being smart, having a good view of what the government is bringing down the pipe, can be life saving.
Mhm.
Just watching what happened during COVID was a very, very good example of this, by keeping up on what they were talking about with the vaccines, what they were talking about with the vaccine passes, learning how those passes worked, learning your way around them. All of these are great skills that can help protect you and your family, and just, give you more freedom. The government is not going to give it to you, it would seem. And so you are going to have to learn those skills for yourself. Right. That's me done.
Well, I I don't have any direct follow up to that, because you basically said at the end everything that I would have said. The only thing I would possibly add to that is, for the necessary survival skills, anyone who has access to good lands and people who are used to those lands, whether they be rural areas in America or Pakistan or Russia or wherever, if you can learn survival skills, hunting, fishing, how to clean and field dress a deer or a hog or a bear wherever you live, you can learn life necessary skills, how to, grow herbs and vegetables in a garden, how to build basic shelter, understand the basics of how to exist within nature. I lean that way. Maybe because I'm Uncle Ted pilled, but because I think that the more of us that keep alive the necessary skills to live, even if every single piece of technology fails or is taken from us, the better chance that we have of building real community around the natural order of things. That's the only thing I would really put in there, is don't just focus on pure how to survive the machine if you have access to doing other things. I'm not saying don't also understand how a plasma gun works, or how to hack the virtual reality socket that you have to use to, make sure that you can go under the radar from the diversity and inclusion robots that come down your street. Like, that's a good skill to have too, of course, in the future. But, be grounded in reality and be able to take care of your own biological and family needs in lieu of also learning technological survival skills too. So that's the only thing I would add to that.
Well, the urban versus the rural skill set is quite different.
I
And
know, yeah, it's
so,
and
there will be, if this comes in, there will be people that are still trapped in the cities, despite the exhortation of their rural friends to get out now, as I have been exhorted many times. I'm trying. So
you and Mrs. Fist should come live with me here in Appalachia.
we, we definitely should get out of London. I'll tell you that much. Yeah. Did you have some stuff to read as well?
Certainly, yeah.
Excellent.
If you don't
Excellent.
mind, go ahead and pull up my slide number 2, and we'll start there.
I will do that.
I really love this picture, but yeah, I want to bring up, this is from Encyclopedia Britannica. Now, I want to start with this here. Remember, I told you to keep in mind the legend, the myth of the Tower of Babel from the Bible. I wanted you to keep that in mind and be thinking about that story while Chris read his dissertation tonight. The myth may have been inspired by the Babylonian Tower Temple north of the Marduk Temple, which in Babylonian was called Babelu, or Babala, the gate of God, Hebrew from Babel or Bavel. The similarity in pronunciation of Babel and Balal, to confuse, led to the play on words in Genesis 11:9. Therefore, its name was called Babel, because the Lord confused the language of all the earth. So, there's another non-biblical sourcing of that I just wanted to share tonight. So go ahead and bring the nice artwork of the Tower of Babel back up, and I'll share my dissertation for tonight. Excuse me. And before I do that, let me do what I promised to do. We are in the final leg of the show now, so I'm going to pop open the advertisement link. Just to let you guys know again, all the donations that come in for Empire of Lies, I split with my friend Chris here, 50-50. And if you'd like to support me, you'll also be supporting him and the great work he does for this stream series too. And after my dissertation and our wrap up, we will be getting to all of your input, super chats, etc. All right, let's go ahead and move now to what I have to say about tonight's topic. As Chris laid out in his presentation tonight, the failure of such a project is guaranteed. What is not guaranteed, however, is how much of our civilization, our way of life, and our identity will be destroyed in the process. This is what I want you to think about tonight. That's why in the title, the second part of the title is Will We? Those who aren't new to my work already know that I'm not a doom merchant. I do not tell you about the darknesses of this world to fill your head with dread and hopelessness, but to inspire you to fight the darkness intelligently and morally. That's why I talk about the Go Free method in Jason Kuna's work so much. It's why I encourage people to take the high road. The modern day Tower of Babel, which is what Chris talked about tonight, the global anti-white, new age communist technocracy crap, that's going to fail. We know it can't succeed. It is too out of sync with reality, and it's too out of sync with human nature. But we cannot fail. What do I mean? We must keep alive what matters to our identity, to our people, to our civilization. Your identity is not GDP, gross national product. Your identity is not whether or not a certain sport ball team got to the playoffs or not. Your identity is not a percentage in ESG scores for a global corporation. Your identity is not what an NGO says it is when they bring in immigrants that don't speak your language or know the difference between your house and a hole in the ground. It's not the hottest pop star. It's not your favorite anime. Your identity is not which political party wins. Your identity isn't Donald Trump, and your identity isn't someone else. It's not even which country wins a war. Your identity is not Ukraine. Your identity is not Russia. My identity is not America. Chris, your identity isn't Britain. These are entities. These are political bodies. These are no longer natural outgrowths of an ethnicity. These are no longer a collection of truly noble elites that want to do what's right for their people and enshrine the resources, the lands, and the way of life of the people they lead. None of our countries are these things anymore. So, what is it that we protect? What should our identity be in spite of this utter ruin? Our people have warred on each other many times and been a party to many powerful empires, from Rome to the modern day GAE, the global anti-white empire, headed by Israel and the United States. But our people have survived every time. We have survived by being loyal to our own families, our own communities, our religions, our local traditions. We have survived by being cunning, better prepared, and willing to do what the regime is unwilling to do. We need to be able to outsmart, to outthink, and to outlast the unleashed dogs of war and the desperate failed statesman functionaries. And that is exactly what we must do again as this spiteful, ugly colossus falls. America, Canada, Britain, France, Germany, and a dozen other powerful white countries are completely given over to the hatred and abuse of our own people in pursuit of the modern-day Tower of Babel project. It is vitally important that you, listening to this live or on replay, realize what we face, and most importantly, why we face it. Because if we know why we face it, we can instill that knowledge into our children and our grandchildren, so hopefully we won't make these mistakes again or allow it to get this bad. We cannot fight our current governments. We can't fight them even indirectly. They will crush us. Nor can we affect change on a global scale. In short order, anyway. What we can do is educate ourselves, our families, and our communities about what we face and what we have to do to survive. This very energy is what led me and Chris to make this stream series in the first place. It's what led Brant Danger to create the School of the West. It's what inspired Jason Kuna to create the Go Free method. We exist on a mental and spiritual battlefield, so that must be our first defense. You must stop doom scrolling the news. You must stop caring about politics and affairs outside the local area that directly affect you. You must invest yourselves into building the strongest, smartest, most positive communities where you live, for your people, for your ethnicity, for your family. This is how we will triumph over the arrogant, spiteful mongrels that guide this Colossus. This modern day Tower of Babel project is led by weak, hollow fools. And so we must be the opposite. We must be strong-willed, intelligent, and wise. We must be cunning as our ancestors were, who outwitted the bears and lived in caves through the long winter, because a long winter approaches, and only the tough and the smart will survive to see the dawn. And that's what I have prepared for tonight.
Wow, that was really nice. Yes, I really like that. I particularly liked your reprisal of the speech in Fight Club. It seemed, you are not your, you are not your furniture. You are not your apartment. Except
Right.
I
Well,
think your
I
version
didn't
was
get
way
it from
better,
that.
to be perfectly honest.
I only saw Fight Club once a very, very long time ago when it first came out.
You should do like a new version of Fight Club.
Okay.
It would be
Well,
awesome.
I promise you, I did not plagiarize Fight Club for this.
I would also like to point out that for those of us who are living in an urban environment where, community is very, very thin on the ground, building a community of people online is a really, really good idea, especially if you do meetups and you go to sort of meet them. Every friend that you make, often you don't know who your true friends are until crisis hits. But one of the great things about crisis is that in a crisis, you very quickly figure out who your friends are. So a little bit of crisis can be a really, really good way to sort the wheat from the chaff. You may meet 50 people and then a crisis comes along and you realize you can only depend upon 5 of them. But 5 good friends is a very, very powerful thing indeed. Remember, always the network effect. These things multiply exponentially. This is the fundamental basis of society. I do one thing, you do another thing. And as, they network together and trade with your friends. If you can, make something, make a little black market, even if you're just selling mint and, they're selling something else, right? Try and make a black market network in this way. Just trade things with your friends and your acquaintances. It's always good practice.
Indeed. And my closing statement tonight is absorb the things that are healthy. I'm not telling you to never listen to content again, but just be healthy. Because my life got better when I stopped caring about national politics, when I stopped caring about reading about every war and everything awful and evil that global oligarchs were doing. Those people are going to do that forever, 24/7. That stuff just makes you just paralyzed with fear and frustration and feeling impotent to do anything. Instead, I read about what's going on locally. I read about what East Tennesseans are doing. I read about what the senators and representatives for my state are doing. I found out what the local municipalities are up to and what the sheriffs are doing. I found out what churches in the area are full of anti-white paws and which ones are against it. And I network with the people who are against it. This is why we've been able to push anti-whiteism out of the schools and churches around here, because so many of the people around here get really fired up about it and they're just ready and willing to talk about it with somebody else. And it only takes 2 people to start a group. You and one other disgruntled worker, that's all it takes. You get together and you do something about it. And doing something about it in the modern age, it doesn't mean you have to get the torches and pitchforks. That's not what I'm saying. But when you get together with a bunch of angry people and do stuff on the local level, it matters. Because a local sheriff might only get like 5 emails a month. And if 15 people from a local church show up and say, you have to stop this, sheriff, he's going to pay attention to that. And so that's what I encourage all of you guys to do. You can still pay attention to the news, get on Facebook, care about your politicians and stuff, but do it through a hyper-local lens. Only care about the things that you and people you know locally can actually go in front of people and demand change. And then do that. And that way you'll meet people of similar mind and energy that can build community together around making things better where you live. That's what it's all about. So that's my closing statement is that tonight. So I'm going to leave it off there.
If I could just give another perspective for those of you who are living in urban environments, large cities, try and find a good church. A good church is a real blessing. Try and stay away from denominations that are highly posed, which, to be perfectly frank, is pretty much everything except orthodoxy at the moment. In the UK, I can't really speak for the US, but if you go to one of these services, particularly on a major holiday, you will find out very, very quickly whether they are posed or not. If there is a woman preaching, it's paused. If they talk about how great gay marriage is, it is paused. If they do not believe that God is a transcendent external entity, paused, and just keep trying to find. There are a lot of people searching for non-paused religions.
Hmm.
Orthodoxy, for example, the Orthodox Church is going through a bit of a revival at the moment, just as everyone flees these horrible paused churches, which no one really wants to attend. So try that. It may be it's a bit of an adjustment to get used to, but personally speaking, it has brought me peace. And I've met a bunch of really, really good people. And the people who go to church regularly, are generally speaking much more serious people
Hmm.
than, I mean, I don't mean serious as in they never laugh. I just mean serious in their beliefs about, what is right. And those kinds of people are very, very good to know as friends, because when it comes to it, when the government says to them, "Oh, you can't do this, you can't believe in God," generally speaking, they will just say no. This is one of the reasons, for example, why totalitarian governments hate the Christians. They have always hated them, because someone who believes in a transcendent sense of right and wrong cannot be bullied in the same way. Sure, you can bully them physically, but you can't get inside their mind. You can't get them to accept that the abuse is proper. And these people are a very, very strong force. So I would encourage those of you who are stuck in the city, much like I am, to try and find a good church. It might not be easy, but give it a go.
Well, with that being said, we're going to take down the shield banner, and we're going to get to the paid chats that we have tonight. I'm going to go ahead and refresh all of the sites to make sure we don't miss out on anyone's messages. So
Shall we begin?
let's go ahead and embiggen. Sure, we'll pop up to the bigger view there. And as I get all of the sites refreshed here, we're going to start with a paid chat, a hyper chat on Odyssey that actually came in just before the beginning of the stream tonight. So someone, this is Teja again, or Teja, Teja. This comes to us in a $5 hyper chat over on Odyssey. Thank you so much, Teja, or Teja. For $5, Teja says, who should be voting, and should there be voting? Well, that's a loaded question of should there be voting. We all have our ideals. We all think that we know how socioeconomics should work. Mises libertarians to national socialists. Everybody in between. People have different ideas of what should be. I have my opinions too. I don't like universal suffrage. I just don't think that you should afford an equal say to everyone of every age, from every country, from everywhere, from every corner on earth when they come to live in your area. I think that's absolutely retarded and is only going to end in Gibbs and financial ruin. But then again, I'm from a Mises libertarian camp. That's where my philosophy sort of started on all this stuff. So it might be skewed on that. Also, who should be voting? I think anyone who knows and cares and who votes responsibly. And see what I said just a few minutes ago about focusing your lens on only caring about local voting stuff and voting for things that affect you and people you can get in front of and people that you can actually deal with in person. That's how and who I think you should engage with when it comes to voting. I mean, if there's like a public referendum in the UK, or you want to throw in your vote for the national president election in America, might as well. Ain't going to hurt nothing. But that's a long wait for a ship that ain't going to dock, in my opinion, for wanting change. So I don't really think that matters. But maybe I answered that question a little too thoroughly. Chris, what would be your answer to Taja's question? Who should be voting, and should there be voting?
Well, I don't know. I'm a bit more wibbly on this question now than I used to be. I am finding the concept of monarchy much more sort of sympathetic now. The problem, of course, with monarchy is the quality of the king. And unless that king is formed in blood and fire and raised by mass acclaim, the likelihood is that instead of a king, you will simply get a bureaucrat or a figurehead that is ruled from behind by a worm-tongued oligarch. I honestly think that the old system of having landowners have the vote is probably better. It's not perfect. This is the thing that I think people always miss. They're looking for the perfect society. There is no perfect society. There will always be abuses. There will always be the poor. There will always be crime. The question is, would this society be better than what we have now, where the democratic process is upended by having a whole bunch of just idiots voting, a bunch of people who don't share your culture, don't share your language, are only really voting for Gibbs. And we exist in a situation very similar to the late Roman Empire. If any of you know about this, the concept of the dole, or payments to the plebs in the Roman Empire, was a measure of grain given to all citizens, a sort of early form of UBI. And once this was instantiated, it was impossible to take back. And it became such a feature, indeed, that the Roman Empire actually had to go to war with Carthage, because Carthage was where they got all of their grain. And without the grain dole, the society would collapse. You might sort of have a system whereby you have not only property, but IQ as something to do with voting. But all these systems, again, are open to abuse. None of them are perfect.
Right.
This is why you need in my opinion, a highly, not perfectly, but highly culturally and ethnically homogenous society, because at least then everyone is speaking the same language, more or less. Everyone has the same cultural touchstones, more or less, and you get along much better. I mean, I'm sure people will point out the wars between the Catholics and the Protestants, but I'm not sure that these were organically formed and not induced by a malicious manipulator. But yes, so I don't know. I think the system that we have at the moment is really terrible, and no one in the current system is going to vote for anything other than their pure short-term interest, and that is a very, very bad position to be in.
We have two other things here. We have no rants on Rumble, and nothing on Entropy tonight, and we don't have anything on the other platforms, but we do have two things on Cash App to get to. First up, we have from White Student Transmission, my moderator in the chat. Good evening, brother. Good to see you. For $5 US, he just says hails and sends a white hand and a smiley face. Thank you so much, brother. I deeply appreciate it.
Thanks, man.
For $6 US, Jason Kuna, the No White Guilt guy, he is here tonight, and he sends in with his $6. He says, fascinating discussion tonight, folk tithing, Kip. Well, thank you, brother. Keep it Promethean. I hear great things about your stream from last night. I haven't been able to watch it yet, but I will. And for those of you who don't know Jason, he speaks a lot of powerful, preachy truth against anti-whiteism. His main stream is on Sunday evenings, 5 to 8 p.m. Eastern. You should definitely go check it out. No White Guilt is his ID on all the sites. So definitely go check
Jason.
him out.
Appreciate
Thank you,
it,
Jason. Mate. And thank you to all of you who share the streams and who are here. Thank you to all of you who listen on replay. Thank you very much for everything that you all do to help make this possible. We will definitely be back next Thursday with the next installment of Empire of Lies. And Monday, we will have more Discordant Dragons. I hope you all have a wonderful, positive weekend. Please don't just enjoy the streams. Embrace the good and positive ideas we give you and build a better life with them. That's the whole purpose of these streams, is to give you the ideas to make your life and the lives of others around you better. So go out and do. And with that being said, good evening, everyone. I hope you have a great weekend. God bless.
Thanks so much for coming, everyone. I hope you have a blessed week. Good night.
Good night.